Welcome to the show. My name is Lester Kiewit.
And I'm Tara Roos.
Welcome to The Bull, where we talk politics, parliament, and a hot take or two. As always, I'm joined by Tara. How are you doing, Tara?
Good.
Very good?
Yeah.
Not being sued?
No, thankfully not us.
Not us.
Not us, not this time.
Not us this time. Because apparently a certain politician ignores the vitriol spewed against foreign migrants to this country, but is very on his feelings when it is people who look and sound like him. But anyway, that's maybe how we start the show. Let's talk about why no political party in South Africa, largely, I'm not going to be generalizing here. There are, of course, some political voices that have spoken out against xenophobia. But why is it, Tara, that no party generally has spoken out against xenophobia? We've had an increase in Operation Dudula presences, marches. They marched to SERI, the Socio-Economic and Rights Institute, in July. They describe civil society as being unpatriotic for defending the constitutional rights of all those who live in South Africa, including migrants. And we focus on African migrants to South Africa. At that march, you saw Abahlali Basim Jondolo, the shack dwellers movement, coming out to defend SERI, literally, physically, with their bodies. And sheepishly, Operation Dudula just made a beeline and said, oops, wrong address. But we don't see that defense of the Constitution and the rights of all those who live in South Africa from our body politic in general. Why is that so?
I think that a lot of political parties are very scared to come out and talk about the rise in xenophobia in South Africa because it doesn't benefit them. For a lot of these political parties, because their voter base intrinsically holds certain xenophobic beliefs, they do not want to speak out against that because immigrants can't vote. And it does not benefit these political parties to talk about and defend a group of people who will not benefit them in the long run. And I think specifically for me, I defend South Africa and South Africans at all costs. I love this country, but it is deeply disturbing the increase of xenophobia in this country and xenophobic attacks. You hear stories of how mothers are getting pulled out in clinic lines trying to get their babies vaccinated. And I think it is really easy to scapegoat immigrants because they cannot vote, because they are a demographic in South Africa that is largely underrepresented politically. And it is really easy for South Africans to scapegoat the problems of the political establishment onto a minority group of individuals. And I do not think that that is okay. I think specifically looking at the narrative that is happening on Twitter, looking at the narrative that is within Operation Dudula, I think that it is extremely concerning that these people are coming out and portraying themselves as patriotic South Africans. You are not patriotic, you are violating the Constitution. Section 27 guarantees the right to health for everyone in South Africa. That's also affirmed by the Public Health Act and the Refugee Act. And Section 29 affirms education for all. And I think specifically when it comes to kids, like my heart breaks. I watched this interview on Newsroom Africa about a mother talking about how she was waiting in line to get her baby vaccinated and she was pulled out, and she had gone for about a month straight and she couldn't get her 7-month-old baby vaccinated because she was getting pulled out of the line. And I think what these South Africans do not realize is that they have more in common with that immigrant mother trying to get her baby vaccinated in that clinic line than they do with the politicians trying to push this propaganda.
And the propaganda says our public health facilities are being overrun by foreign nationals. If you just look at the national statistics alone, we have, I think, only 13% of South Africans who have medical aid. The rest rely on the public health system. But the number of people who currently reside out of the more than 62 million people who live in South Africa, only about 4 or 5% of those are in fact foreign nationals living in South Africa. Many of them could be documented. Many of them have permit status. Many of them have residency. And of course, there may even be those who are undocumented. But if you look at that number, 4 or 5% of people in South Africa of foreign nationality, the numbers then don't stack up. How then can 4 or 5% of the population then cause an overwhelming of our public healthcare system? The numbers don't make up.
Absolutely. And I think when you look, so Stats SA in 2020 did a study and they said there are only about 2.2 million foreign nationals in South Africa, 46% which they believe are undocumented. 40% live in Gauteng, 16% live in the Western Cape. You cannot look at those numbers and then safely say, these are the reasons that our public healthcare system is failing. These are the reasons that our schools are overcrowded. It is not the fault of foreign nationals in South Africa for the failings of national government. And I understand where many people, more specifically people who live in Gauteng, are coming from. I also do, and I can relate to the fact that it is a national security risk. You cannot have droves of people coming into your country. You do not know who they are, where they're coming from, what their intentions are, what their purpose for being in the country is, and you have no way to monitor them, because we do, as a country, need those social security measures in place. However, then you also need to turn to the government, because if you are someone who is fleeing a war zone or fleeing a country where there are dire socioeconomic circumstances, like many of these immigrants are, if there was an opportunity to go to a country that was not far from my house, where I didn't need to take a boat or a plane to get there, where there was a life of better economic prospects, and the border is quite literally wide open, you could walk across into South Africa, I would do anything, specifically as a young South African if I was looking for a better life for myself, as a parent if I was looking for a better life for myself. You would do anything to escape those circumstances. And so we cannot blame people looking for a better life. Is it illegal? Yes, absolutely. But then you also need to turn around and look at the government and say, hey, what are you doing to prevent this?
Yeah. I think there's also the scapegoating in terms of national policy that is being developed. You looked at the recent scare on particularly children falling ill because of unsanitary environments, particularly around spaza shops in informal settlements and in our township areas. And largely the messaging has been around, well, it's because of foreign-owned spaza shops. None of that has been proven. What has been proven is the unsanitary environments immediately around these spaza shops, in our townships, in our informal settlements, which isn't the fault of migrants, it's the fault of local municipalities. If we look at the budget that is spent on environmental health and safety officers in our municipalities, if you have such a deep need for other things, just look at the budgets. And we've spoken to the Consumer Council in South Africa. They said they are worried that municipalities are not spending enough simply on health and safety, the inspectors, to make sure that the environments in which many of these butcheries, eateries, spaza shops operating. So the problem there isn't the people who are operating the stores, operating the businesses. The problem is the local municipalities who aren't making sure that health and safety processes are being adhered to. They are not picking up the rubbish that leads to an infestation of rats and other pests, and then desperate people, they buy black market pesticides. And that's when we have seen that infiltrating within the food system and people falling ill. Again, the problem is with the government and not with the people.
I think that this is a two-folded issue. From a fiscal standpoint, year after year, we look at severe underspending of the municipal infrastructure grant. We look at how municipalities are not reaching their infrastructure caps because they're not spending enough on services. The problem is not that the country is overcapacitated in terms of people and they do not have these clinics, schools, and other basic services to provide for South Africans. It's the fact that we're not spending enough on building those infrastructures for South Africans to use. South Africans at large, not just South African citizens. And this idea that migrants are coming in and are using up these services is just statistically inaccurate. And on the other end, I think when you look at the narrative that is being pushed by big name politicians to this idea that immigrants are to blame for our problems, they're absolutely not. I think, and we talked about the Patriotic Alliance last week, and we're going to get called a Gayton McKenzie hater again. But I mean, Gayton McKenzie is the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture. Culture being a part of his portfolio, although, I mean, he was notably missing from the National Arts Festival and has made his entire tenure about sports. But this idea that we as South Africa, and you look at the legacy of South Africa in which people of color were excluded from what is seen as the broader cultural diaspora of South Africa. And now you are going, and we are going into diaspora wars, essentially, with people who live and contribute to this country, and that is now seen as our culture. Kate McKenzie camped out at the border during election season to try and chase immigrants away. What was that doing for the broader South African public? There was a
He campaigned on switching off the life support system if he had found an undocumented foreign national in our hospitals. That's what he campaigned on for the Patriotic Alliance.
And it's absolutely absurd that we now expect the South African public to be like, you know what, we should be loving and welcoming and opening to these foreign nationals in our country when our politicians, when our ministers still hold these beliefs to their system. And I think when you, statistically speaking, and I know and I can understand specifically for residents of Gauteng who say, you know what, this is not my lived experience. I know that on my street there are X amount of foreign nationals. These foreign nationals are in school with my kids. My kid can't get a placement here. And what might feel like your lived reality, unfortunately, is not the broader context of the picture. A World Bank study was done in 2018. I read this like 2 days ago about how for every immigrant worker in South Africa, it creates 2 localized jobs. Immigrants contribute to the economy of South Africa. I think that there's this idea that they don't pay taxes, they don't contribute. Like that is just all false. You cannot blame 4% of the population for 98% of the population's problems.
I would argue, and this would be an anecdotal analysis, that you would have a greater propensity of an undocumented foreign national reporting to a public health facility out of fear that they may be reported. So you may then actually see maybe a more well-off person would maybe largely even pay for private primary health care than reporting to a public health hospital.
And I think this idea that the South African government is trying to do nothing about illegal immigration is also false. Look, I am the biggest contender. We need to close the borders. Not because I think that I am very anti-immigration and I don't want to...
Close the borders or secure borders?
We need to put a fence up. Regardless, we need to put a fence up. We need to have people patrolling the borders for multiple reasons, not just because I think I want and I do strongly believe in the rights and the dignity of immigrants in South Africa. I do think that there is a legal way to go about that, and South Africa needs to open up those legal channels. But even from a perspective of drug smuggling, it's not safe to have your borders open. You cannot just have people walk across the border. Like, I think when you look at the Department of Defense, when you look at the Department of Home Affairs, it's just been this continuous blame game, and they need to secure the border. That is the bottom line, I think, of this long-winded story. But also from a fiscal standpoint, we need to better integrate how money is sent from national treasury and national government into local municipalities, because we are not going to fix our infrastructure problem when year after year, I mean, you look at these cities underspending on infrastructure, and it's a massive issue.
So going back to political parties and pandering to a South African voter base, who are skeptical, and I'm using very nice and flowery words here because people will say, "What? I'm not a xenophobe." So, pandering to a voter base that are skeptical about the impact or contributions of African migrants. We also have to put a caveat there because we don't hear the complaints of Western or European visitors or travelers who overstay their 90-day tourist visa. Nothing is said about them. They don't get profiled. They aren't asked to carry a passport or an ID on them. But for some reason, African migrants do. But we have political parties who are pandering to this electorate. And it really is about the growth of populism in South Africa that's going to play a bigger and bigger role in upcoming elections.
And I think when you look at, I think the two biggest perpetuators of this would be the Patriotic Alliance and Action SA. I watched Action SA's press briefing 2 days ago where they announced a new Tshwane, Chaka, and Homan Mashaba got up. And whenever he gives a speech, he always says two things. When I was the mayor of Joburg, and these illegal immigrants. And I think, to me, that is so disconcerting because like a political party, like the Patriotic Alliance, I can understand the populist angle, right? It is who their voter base is. It appeals to a lot of their issues that their voter base is targeting. But when you look at a political party like Action SA, where they seem to be a little more centrist in a lot of their policies, I mean, I would argue that they are probably currently the best political party opposition in Parliament currently. From a legislative perspective, the policies that they're putting forward are very strong and sound. But then you also see this really broad populist appeal that they're trying to go to say, you know what, illegal immigrants are the problem. Illegal immigrants are not the problem. And I think that it is really upsetting when you see political parties play into this narrative to score cheap political points.
Is there a difference between a political party that says, that couches the conversation that says, we're not against migrants, we're against illegal migrants? To me, it is being on the soft side of a dog whistle around immigration, particularly African immigration to South Africa.
Another important thing that I do think we need to contextualize is that illegal immigration in South Africa is a civil offense. It's not a criminal offense. And there's a big difference between a criminal offense and a civil offense. And yes, do people need to come into the country legally? Absolutely. They do need to follow the correct channels, because we also, as South Africa, do need to protect our national security interests, because there is a security aspect and a security threat. But I do not think that you could get up and say, I'm not against immigration, I'm just against illegal immigration, but not have a robust plan to how you plan to fix those channels. There are massive backlogs when we look at migrant visa applications, when we look at the relationships and the displaced relationships and strange relationships between the various African embassies in South Africa as a whole, when we look at backlogs within Home Affairs. Like, and I mean, the fact that we could sort out having a digital nomad visa and a entertainment tourist visa in months from the Department of Home Affairs, but we're still looking at the constrained relationship between the Zimbabwean embassy and the South African embassy, and looking at those specific worker visas that are in backlog. Like, these are issues we need to sort out, because I think when you look at the narrative coming from the South African public, it is really easy to scapegoat a demographic and a group of people who can't vote. And I think that it is eerily similar, and I think it's just tragic and heartbreaking that we are more specifically putting the lives of children. And to me, I think that is it's absolutely disgusting when I look at these instances of kids getting pulled out of schools, mothers getting pulled out of clinic lines. Like, those are kids.
These, of course, as you mentioned, the deep personal cost. But also it raises the question, what does it mean to be South African? Yeah. There are many stories, and I have personal stories and experiences of children whose parents, and we'll say their parents are from Zimbabwe, and so they enjoyed the special dispensation of being Zimbabwean and working in South Africa. That was threatening to come to an end, but that has now been stalled by our courts. So you would have children who are either born in South Africa or come to South Africa with their parents at a very young age. Their outlook on the world is South African. They have been taught with a South African curriculum in our education system. The teams that they probably support, sporting teams, are maybe South African. And that when a Zimbabwean special dispensation does come to an end and it's time for you to go home back to Zimbabwe, you will have a generation of the migrants, the children of migrants, who have gone from childhood to adulthood only ever knowing South Africa as home. What happens then?
The Constitution says that the land belongs to all those who live in it. And I think when you look at the rich history of South Africa and what it means, I mean, we're called the Rainbow Nation for a reason. And yes, legality does come into play. And I do affirm many of the concerns that many South Africans have, specifically those, and I can understand the frustration coming from someone who has private healthcare, who experiences a lot of privileges in life. The only immigrants I really encounter are those of the European kind and those who come from the African diaspora but are of a very upper middle class background. And yes, do I not know what it's like to stand in a line for 16 hours and queue at a clinic? And might it be frustrating to me as an individual if someone who I hear maybe has a different accent to me, or I know is not of a particular nationality, is helped before me? Might that cause some frustration? Yes, and I can absolutely understand that, although that might not be my lived experience. However, I think in a country and in a cultural and historical contexts like South Africa, where certain groups of people were prioritized over others because of arbitrary constructed lines that actually had nothing to do with who we are as a populace, it is very disparaging and disheartening to see South Africans, more specifically black and colored South Africans, attain the xenophobic narrative towards other Africans and other African nationals.
Look, my personal belief system, my ideology, my outlook on life can come into conflict what I know with the real reality of the world is. Are borders man-made? Yes. Are there things like countries? Actually, no, because that's all man-made. Countries, nations, states don't actually exist, but they do because we have decided they do. And I appreciate and I respect that. But often my own, call it idealism, says, well, there really shouldn't be no borders, comes into conflict with what I know is the reality, the real politic in our world today and in Africa ever since Africa was carved up at the Berlin Conference.
If you were to get rid of every single migrant, whether it be every single illegal immigrant, every single legal immigrant, if you were to get rid of that 4% of the population, the problems that you are facing would still exist tomorrow. It would.
Okay, we've talked about politics. Let's talk about Parliament. Parliament is in recess at the moment. What does recess mean? Tell our viewers what recess means. Do MPs go on holiday? Do they go home? Do they put their feet up? What does recess mean?
So recess is a period where members of Parliament, think of it as a break, but not really. So they go back, they do party political work, they go to the constituencies.
Constituency work.
Constituency work. A lot of people would be surprised, although Parliament is in Cape Town, many of the MPs actually do not live in Cape Town. Most MPs come from the northern parts of the country. And so they will go back to their homes, they will do constituency work, do party work. Parliament is back on the 1st of September, and we will restart and... another eventful third term is upon us.
So recently there's something that's called the Constitutional Review Committee in Parliament. Annually they invite people, citizens, institutions and political parties say, look, if there's something that you would want to change about the Constitution, you're welcome to do so. Some of them could be pie in the sky, some could actually have merit. The Constitution is a living, breathing document. It's not made out of stone. There have already been 21 constitutional amendments since our Constitution was adopted in 1996. But let's look at some of the political parties who've offered up their contributions on where they would want to see the Constitution change. Let's start with the Democratic Alliance. What would they change?
The summary of the DA's bill is that they want to remove impeachables, or what they call impeachables. So people who have been removed from constitutional positions like judges, heads of Chapter 9 institutions. And the thesis of their argument is that essentially, if you have been found convicted of a particular crime and you can be constitutionally removed in another organ of state, you should not then be able to be re-elected through electoral office.
And this is, they're using former Western Cape Judge President John Hlophe and the MK Parliamentary leader, they're using him as the example.
Absolutely. This bill was tabled by their spokesperson for constitutional justice and development, Glenys Breitenbach, also former NPA advocate. Look, legally and administratively speaking, this bill is very constitutionally sound. I think out of all three bills, it has the most likelihood of passing. I actually don't believe that any of these are currently a front runner to pass. The way constitutional amendments work is that you do need a 2/3 majority, so that would be 2/3 in the National Assembly and then 6 out of the 9 provinces in the NCOP. But very importantly, and when we look at MK's bill, this is really important, if you would like to change Section 1 of the Constitution, that 2/3 then goes up to 75%. And that seems extremely unlikely. We covered Action SA's bill at large last week in our last episode. So they want to remove deputy ministers, they want to increase the amount of out of cabinet appointees from 2 to 4, and they want to really cut back what they see as cabinet perks.
Just on the DA and why it would require a constitutional amendment to have those impeached individuals, to prevent them from running for office. The Constitution says if you're 18 years old, if you're of sound mind, and you've not been sentenced to a criminal sentence
within
of,
the
I think,
last 12
within
months.
the last, no, sentenced to more than 5 years in the last 12
12
months,
months,
you are eligible. So they would want to make a constitutional amendment to that section to say, also, if you've been held some sort of public or state office and you have been impeached, you no longer qualify.
And I think that clause is really interesting because there's merit to the DA's argument to say if you were found of an impeachable offence and you were removed constitutionally, why should you then be allowed to hold elected office? The back end of that argument is also South Africans voted for that particular political party who then appointed that particular person. And if people knew that that person was going to be appointed by that party, they would not have voted for that party. So when are you really infringing on the voters' rights to vote freely in a free and democratic South Africa? And then the MK Party's bill, I think out of reading all of these key bills, it's the one that shocked me the most. They have so many amendments that are just so far and wide in terms of what they would like to do. Look, MK has called for the scrapping of the Constitution and invoking parliamentary supremacy since its inception, which I think is quite funny, given the fact that they've never actually had a full parliamentary bench out of all of their MPs a year into the Seventh administration starting. We often joke, how could you call for parliamentary supremacy when all of your MPs aren't in parliament? But I think when you look at MK's bill, more specifically, trying to change Section 1 of the Constitution, which is seen as the foundations, it is really interesting from a political perspective because when we look at the history of MK, and the MPs in MK, more specifically their leader Jacob Zuma, none of these issues had ever really been a problem when they had held elected office under the Zuma era and the Zuma administration. Out of all of these three bills, in my personal opinion, I think none of them right now stand the likelihood of passing. Action SA would need the DA to support their bill. The likelihood of the DA supporting their bill is basically 0 to none, even though Action SA's bill is actually just an advancement of the DA's 2023 remuneration of office bearers bill. The DA would need the ANC. I think that the likelihood of that happening is also very unlikely. And MK, unfortunately, 75% of MPs are not agreeing on anything in this administration.
So what the MK Party is proposing, among other things, amending Section 25 to enable land expropriation without compensation. That would then go against the property clause in the Constitution, introducing direct presidential elections, mandatory compulsory military service for all citizens aged 18 to 25, restricting voting and citizenship rights to only those born of two South African citizen parents, elevating the NPA to a Chapter 9 institutions, merging the Special Investigating Unit, recognizing Khoi and San and Nama languages as official languages, and then nationalizing strategic minerals and granting a proposed state bank the power to print currency.
And that is just like the most mixed match pieces and amendments that you have ever heard together, which I think really is coherent with MK's policy and ideology stance, is that they have certain pieces of legislation where it's just like, okay, I can get on board with this, and then others I'm just like, how did you come up with this? And I think this is the issue with populist parties, is that they are very gone with the wind, is that they will be here on a certain policy position today and then they will change their minds tomorrow, and it really just depends on what they feel fits the narrative at the moment to appeal to their voter base.
If the MK Party studied their history, if the MK Party just knew who are the founder members of the liberation movement, the union movement, the civic society movement in South Africa, these are migrants. Clemens Kadali was a migrant from Malawi, one of the leading figures in the trade union movement in South Africa. Chief Albert Luthuli, South African, one of 4 South African Nobel Prize winners, was born in Mozambique. If any of the MK Party members were to realize that under what they are proposing, the children of Albert Luthuli would not be given citizenship rights in South Africa, and that is absolutely bonkers.
And I think when you look at this narrative that is coming from the MK party, I just find it so bizarre in the way that they are trying to spin these amendments and their policy positions, coming from people who have been longtime veterans in government, who have held positions in cabinet, who have held real policy influence in this country, who are now coming out and saying, you know what, actually, what I told you for the last 10 years, I don't believe it anymore. This is the right position. How is their voter base going to align with what they're supposed to believe? I don't know.
Time for our weekly hot take. I have a thought on a hot take, and I think of the story this week of Peter Louis Myburgh of the Daily Maverick, on camera, beautiful, candid camera, essentially laying a trap for the suspended chairperson of the IDT and capturing of a bribe that was allegedly, you have to say allegedly. Peter Louis says you have to say allegedly because they're not convicted yet, but an alleged bribe caught on camera. 60,000 rand in a Dior shopping bag passed across the table. I know you're saying that recession indicators are fake.
No, I said not everything is a recession indicator.
But you know what is a recession indicator?
A 60,000 rand bribe, yeah.
60,000 rand bail. That is called, we have shrinkflation, we have shrimpflation, now we have bribeflation. Offered him 60,000 rand, and then the rest of the bribe in installments for possible future tenders. That just, to me, that's insulting. I know that 60,000 rand is a lot of money, but the offering of 60,000 rand as a bribe is, I'm sorry, it is an affront to my sensibilities. Offering 60,000 rand and the rest in installments. But I'm joking here. But I think what it actually means is, at the ease, the regularity, and possibly even the thought of how many other bribes and soliciting of let's quieten the truth does that episode represent. So while I make a joke about 60,000 rand is not enough, what I am serious about is just looking at that video. To me it seems they probably did that more than once.
Absolutely. My hot take of the week, I mean, you're not going to agree with what I'm going to say.
I never agree with that.
My hot take of the week, I don't want another man to talk to me ever again. So let me tell you a story. Over the weekend, my friends and I go out. This guy is like trying to talk to me. So he asks for my Instagram. I give him my Instagram account. This man searches me up on Instagram. He's like, why do you have 12,000 followers? And I make a joke initially and I was like, oh, I'm famous. He didn't find that funny. I was like, oh, okay, fine. I was like, yeah, no, like I'm just like somewhat well known. Like I'm a wannabe political analyst is what I try to say to people, because I don't want to be like, I'm a serious political analyst, even though I am. He then goes, he gives me this funny look. He's like, oh, you just don't look like someone who knows anything about politics. Excuse me. Excuse me. So yeah, for the foreseeable future, I would just like no men to speak to me ever. I would say no men whose frontal lobe is developed, but in my personal experience, coming into contact with men in their early 30s, it's just even there, not there.
So if you are at least 35, you can hit her up on her Instagram and all the social media channels. And if you're willing to acknowledge that she's a bona fide political commentator, knows her stuff. Yeah. What's the handle?
_Tara Roos.
Of course it's _Tara
Tara Roos.
That's our show for the week, Tara. Chat to you next week. And we will find you again on the CapeTalk YouTube channel. Search up The Bull. You can find us on all the socials. And again, if you have a question, if you have a comment, particularly about politics and maybe some of the procedures of Parliament, you can drop us a comment down below. Until next time, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.